Awesome, awesome. Hello, everyone. So excited to hold space with the folks that we have on this call today and with you, wherever you are, whenever you are watching this. If this is 2023 and you are watching Lovecraft Country for the first time, like I'm excited to hold space with you right now. If this is the day after we uploaded these on our website and you're just so excited to hear us talk, I'm also excited to hold space with you. Thank you for joining us. This is episode one. What we have for you, as you can read on our website, is just a way to have a conversation about Lovecraft Country as you are rewatching it or as you're introducing people to it. This information and content is influenced by multiple different perspectives, but really importantly, by all Black perspectives, since I really look at Lovecraft Country as a gift almost to the Black community. So that's who you'll see on these calls today. My name is Ashley Hazley. I am the Assistant Director for the Muhammad Ali Institute for Peace and Justice. I think it was really important for us to sit down as the Muhammad Ali Institute and have a conversation about Lovecraft Country, because as we find ourselves in 2020, our communities are asked to not congregate and to not be in community with one another for our own safety surrounding COVID-19. With that being said, that's really hard for communities who historically get by coming together, right, and gathering. And so I thought it was so amazing that during COVID and then also during really a spike in the racial justice movement in our country, we were able to be gifted with this 10-part series, about an hour each episode, called Lovecraft Country, where we get to sit and have conversations virtually, in person, like whatever, in person safely, right? But whatever surrounding information that has been robbed and stolen from us through our own education system. So super excited. In all of these conversations, there'll be a few folks from the community who will gather and just have a conversation about Lovecraft Country, right? I will always have about 10 questions to ask of our community members. You will be able to find all of their bios on our website, as well as links to kind of the work that they do. And then also on our website, you'll be able to see a place for you to respond to anything that you hear from within these conversations, because we want to just keep those conversations going. So again, my name is Ashley Hazley. I'm the Assistant Director of the Muhammad Ali Institute. And I'm going to start with our first question. Is going to really be a roll call of who's on the call right now to chat and why they believe that the show Lovecraft Country was important. I'm going to let whoever wants to go first go first.
I'll go. Hi, my name is Ryan Brooks, and I work at the University of Louisville Health Sciences Campus, Office of Diversity and Inclusion, as a program coordinator. I'm also in the community a birth doula, and I don't even know what to say about Lovecraft Country, which I actually started rewatching today. And at the end of it, I knew that I was going to have to rewatch it because it's just like such a deep show. But I mean, this is such an important show. Like, I love sci-fi, but specifically, I love sci-fi that's like rooted in history and like real life stories. So yeah, I just feel like it's a really magical show. It's a very spiritual show on like an ancestral level, and I think it's like exactly what I needed at that time. And I think like a lot of people probably feel the same way.
Let's go with Asha. I'll call on people just for this question though.
Okay, so hi.
Oh yeah, she paused.
Hi y'all, I'm Asha Brown. Did I freeze? Am I back? Okay.
You're back.
I use she, her pronouns, and I play a lot of roles. I'm an assistant professor in health promotion and behavioral sciences. in the School of Public Health at U of L. I'm also the director of the Office of Youth Development at Louisville Metro Government. So I have dual roles. And then I also view myself as a community engaged researcher and evaluator. So I do a lot of my work with organizations in community, especially organizations that are specifically focused in on Black youth and Black people in general. I think that Lovecraft country for me is so important to this moment because one, we're all at the house. And I needed something to get my mind off of the fact that in the middle of this pandemic, in the middle of being in a city where Black people are viewed as not valuable, it was good to have something that helped me feel connected to my people. In lots of different ways. And I think there are multiple episodes that helped me feel connected, but I'm a big sci-fi person, just like Zion shared. And with that, I think that not only the sci-fi piece, but also bringing in the history piece was the most impactful for me. And that's why this has such big meaning to me. But then I'll also say, and I'm gonna stop talking, my background and my PhD is in parks and recreation. And one of the things that I studied when I was in graduate school was how Black folks engage in leisure. And oftentimes there's this narrative that Black folks don't, like we don't see participation in public parks. We don't see participation in the National Park Service. Black people don't go outdoors, right? And there was this, luckily I was, in graduate school surrounded by other Black scholars, other Black leisure scholars, and their whole narrative is like, no, absolutely not. We do. And we've been out here and we've been engaging in leisure in so many different ways. It's just not the ways that you all engage in leisure. And also y'all are violent when we try. And so the fact that it's centered around the Green Book, and the Green Book is such a critical and important piece of when we talk about like Black leisure history, I'm really excited to delve into that. And that was really meaningful to me. So it brought in my academic side, but also just the side of me that's just like, I just want to learn and engage in sci-fi / history that is connected to me and people who look like me. And I'll stop talking.
No, for sure. The Green Book was huge, and the thing that's crazy about it is like as I talk to students who watch the show, what is the guide? And I'm like, whoa, it's how we moved around the country for a very long time. And not to critique them, right? It's to critique the folks that's supposed to like help them, right? But no, I really like that. And then when you talked about leisure, that's gonna get into something later on, but like I'll say before watching the show, there were Black experiences that I never attributed to Black folks during these times that I got to see that meant so much. So I appreciate you bringing that up. What about you, Daryl? What's going on? Who are you, and why do you believe the show was important?
What up, folk? My name is Daryl Young Jr. I am the manager of programming at the Muhammad Ali Center, where I focus a lot on community engagement and youth development. I'm also a youth advocate and community organizer in the city of Louisville, and get to occupy a lot of dope community spaces, and get to work with a lot of dope people. That's how I know everybody on this call. Why I found Lovecraft important. I think it's a number of reasons, right? And some of them have already been mentioned. I think just particularly this year, because as Ashley mentioned, y'all might be watching this, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, you might watch it tomorrow, whenever. And although America has been extremely overtly racist, I don't want to make it sound like, everything was all good till 2020 got here and then everything just hit the fan. It's always been here, but I guess due to COVID, people have been able to really examine it a little bit more, and that's why you've seen such a turbulent year and so much unrest and movement and uprising. But for this show to come out in that context, I think was wild. I think it was so important to be able to see a Black cast, to center Black heroes, to center a Black woman in ways that weren't your traditional take on what it looks like for Black leads to play in a series or in entertainment, right? So it wasn't an urban setting, really, right? I mean, they were in Chicago and they were going across America, but the setting was a lot different. Usually, when we talk about or try to contextualize American history for a show like this, it would often be, showing us as The Help or, The Nanny or what have you, or The Butler or what have you. We actually got to see Black folks during this time period actually get to be the ones being the heroes, right? Actually being the ones moving the storyline. They weren't just a plot device or playing the magical Negro. So I thought that was important. To me, the thing that always stuck out, and I think the folks who watch this show, I'm pretty sure you get some people who weren't like big nerds or big sci-fi fans or whatever, but it sounds like everybody so far on this panel is a big sci-fi person. But I think for me, the weird thing about this show is, as crazy as all the different elements of sci-fi and horror in that genre, and you see like the Shogun, and you see all those different kind of animals and creatures, and all the different depictions of horror. To me, it's just so interesting that the scariest thing on the show is white people, right? That is the real horror. Like, that is the real horror. Just the brutality of racism and white supremacy. Like, yeah, we got like monsters, rip people's heads off and all that stuff, but the scariest thing on this show is white people. and I don't think I've ever seen it more contextualized at that point than this show. So that's why I think it was just so cool, and that's why I loved it so much.
No, I definitely appreciate that, Daryl. I think in rewatching the show to prep for this, I start to see those like tidbits of like, this is the scary racism, white folk, like white supremacists, like that is the horror. And I think it comes out, I'm not here to do spoilers just in case you're truly watching it like episode and then this, but like you just start to see some plot points where you're like, wow, you were really more scared. And, in this episode, they talk about sundown towns, right? But you were really scared of the sun going down because you're no longer protected. Then this monster just popped up on you. Like, what? That you can't even conceptualize or understand. So, no, I definitely appreciate that. And then last but most certainly not least, and thank you for the Zoom, Aaron Weathers. Like, who are you? I mean, I know who you are, but who are you, and like, why do you think the show is important?
Thank you. Can y'all hear me? Is it good? Okay, cool. Aaron Weathers. I'm the assistant director at the LGBT Center on the Health Science campus. So I do a lot of just educational training students and professionals on LGBTQ health, especially making sure it's intersectionally focused. But why am I here? I love Lovecraft Country. I'm a blerd like everybody else. I love sci-fi. I love fantasy. I love magic. I love horror. And I think that Lovecraft really takes that and takes history, but it reimagines it in a way that I see Black people centered in it. I see, I'm trying not to do spoilers, but I just love it. That's what I would say. I just love it. Like, check. I can talk about it all day. It was like one of the best parts of 2020 for me. So.
Most certainly one of the best parts of 2020. And so, like, it was just such a needed part of 2020. So yeah, I'm just gonna go ahead and jump in it. So when the episode first started, there was it felt like a retro scene. It was in black and white. You meet like the main character Atticus, who goes by Tick, and you get a lot of foreshadowing in that scene. But I thought it was so interesting that when it seemed like everything was in despair and they were going to make it out of the war. He was caught in a sticky situation. Then you have Jackie Robinson show up and like do a home run hit type situation to the monster that's attacking them. And that just really struck me because I was thinking about kind of some of like that pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality, or even like thinking that we can, that there's certain levels that we can assimilate to, in which we can now save ourselves and like we can be accepted by America. And I could be reaching, right? I'm one of those people. But did that scene strike anybody else? Like, what's up?
Yeah, so like definitely, yeah, like when it first popped off, like I was like one part, like what the heck have I gotten into? And then like one part, oh, so this is how they're gonna, this is how they're gonna start it, right? They're gonna start it with like this incredibly like, talented and like influential like Black figure, showing up in this war that was, as I think most wars, controversial for people of color, for Black folks, definitely enlisting in it. And like this dude's just gonna show up and just like, knock this Joker in the, his whole head. And so I was just like, oh, okay, yeah. So this is how we're gonna do this. The other thing too that I liked about that scene is the same thing that I like about the whole entire series. Like like I think like more than like Black history or Black culture, like music. Like I'm obsessed with music. I'm obsessed with soundtracks, and I love this soundtrack. And one of the things that I love about the soundtrack is like not only do they use like old music and modern music, they use like these speeches, or like audio clips. And so like during that scene, like yeah, all that other stuff is really cool, but I was like really drawn to like the audio clips, that was like playing while all of that was happening. And a lot of it, was rooted in, again, like that controversy of Black people enlisting in the army. Like they're, like gratuitously throwing around the word boy, like, yeah, it was, yeah, that's what struck me in that.
So it's interesting that you said it like that, Ashley. And I don't think it's a reach at all, even though I had never even considered that. But when you talk about, Black participation in service, there's a lot of scholarship around the fact that a lot of Black Americans enlisted in the armed forces in hopes that it would provide them the safety of citizenship, of being recognized as a quote unquote good American, right? So you had Black folks, some of them probably did have a true allegiance to country. Or they would talk about the reasons why people enlist and serve their country, but really it was the hope that it could be a shield against racism, right? That if I serve my country, I have to really be seen as a full American, a full citizen, and guaranteed those rights. And we know that wasn't the case, right? We still saw Black servicemen come back, servicemen and eventually servicewomen still come back to this country and still be persecuted for their, just for being Black. And the fact that it was Jackie Robinson, who we know was lauded as the person who broke the color barrier in sports, but was also extremely conservative and was utilized by Nixon as somebody to be a conservative spokesperson and peddle conservative rhetoric to Black folks. And it wasn't until very late in Jackie Robinson's career in life that he was like, you know what, I was used. I was a tool for conservatives. So I think that has a lot of merit, even though I didn't even think about it when you said that. And it's also really hard to talk about this without spoilers. So I want to say like 5 things, but it would mess up for people that hadn't seen the show. So I'm gonna stop right there.
No, yeah, I didn't catch it the first time I watched it, but the second time the fourth time that I watched it, I was like, oh, wow. I do really, really, really love what you said though, Zion, about the soundtrack. It was a beautiful mix of like old school music, new school music. Like it was really, really great. I think that most episodes have a super important kind of speech. And later on in today's conversation, we're going to talk a little bit about James Baldwin's speech that was used in a very important transitional time. But just like a plug, there's a link under this video to the Langston League syllabus, and they actually pull the soundtrack for all the episodes. And so if you're also like kind of feeling that audio piece, it's a really dope soundtrack. And they do it episode by episode. So just kind of a shameless plug there. The next thing that I want to touch on, all of us are in Louisville, Kentucky, and so we know the name Breonna Taylor, and we know the name James McAtee, and we know how important that those names will continue to be. But living in 2020 during COVID, how important they were in the time where this came out, right? And so how ironic was it that, I'm sorry, my bad, I said that name. I said the name wrong, David McAtee. So how ironic was it that it starts in Kentucky? And like, how did you feel? Like, what does that even mean? Like, why did it start in Kentucky? What are some of your thoughts? If you're saying something, I can't quite hear you.
I can go. I don't know why it started in Kentucky, but I do think it was like a very kind of like a good nod to it. Just being in Kentucky and knowing that like 98% of Kentucky's Black population live in 2 counties, you know, so it's like Fayette and then Jefferson. So we know that like Kentucky is definitely historically and still today, present day, racist. I mean, you know, but it was a good nod for me at least.
I think there's a lot of significance around Kentucky, especially from like, so I'm about to make a big leap stretch thing going on. So I just want to forewarn y'all. I think that Kentucky is the state that they start in because of the fact that Kentucky tried to be this state during the Civil War of like, we're neutral, but we're not, right? And it's this constant, for me, it's this constant like critical lens I have around Kentucky, around like our relationship to the Mason-Dixon line, our relationship to what it means to be in the South, and like, are we in the South? Are we Midwest? Are like the identity crisis that happens? Well, that's what I call it. Folks from Kentucky don't like it when I say that, so if you need to yell at me, feel free to do it. But I did like this constant reconciling of one's identity around that. I think is what stood out to me in terms of like it starting in Kentucky, and then they don't want to spoil it, but eventually there is this need to have to go back through Kentucky later in the show.
For me, it makes me think of Corbin, Kentucky, which, you know, had like a racial uprising, like, you know, in the early 1900s, but more importantly, remained a sundown town until the last part of the 20th century. So for me, that's kind of like, you know, what it brought up. And I don't think a lot of people in Kentucky knew that about Corbin. And I don't think a lot of people, like, you know, nationally know that about Corbin. So, you know, just, yeah, it was rooted in I think even though like it's rooted in history, I think there's a lot of like, you know, use that to kind of like provide like social commentary on today. And I think that, like, for me, that's what them starting in Kentucky was about.
No, I definitely agree. And going back to something that Asha said, Kentucky, the Ohio River, that was a major, major slave port. But still, like, Kentucky gets to escape a little bit of that reality by claiming that it's Midwest because of the way that it operates or whatever. And so I thought it was super interesting, just even symbolic in like Tick traveling up and being almost to Chicago, which you know, maybe we thought was a nicer place for Black folks, but I mean, just, you know, but and having that issue in Kentucky, in that place that has the history of really fueling the slave trade in America, but gets to kind of hide behind this term Midwest, where we forget, like, hey, it was actually in the South though. So awesome. So kind of the next question, I feel like there's gonna be a lot around this, is the guide. So after he gets to Chicago, he links up with his uncle and that part of his family. We learned that his uncle was actually doing the amazing work of creating a guide for Black folks to travel around the country. And also, just kind of an aside, like just an applause to all the Black folks who did contribute to the guide, because like they are so important to the fact that we're sitting here on this call today, right? But yeah, so like, what are your thoughts surrounding the guide? What would you want people to know? And a question that I also have is, do you think that something like that would still be relevant today? Relevant and important today?
So it's funny that you talk about would it be relevant today, because actually, I think it was around Ferguson, when Ferguson happened, there were Black folks trying to create those guides, right? And there was these maps, these heat maps around the country showing like what was like really, where was it really, really hot for Black folks. And since this is pretty much a U of L call, it's all U of L alum, it feels like, on the call. Shout out to Dr. Ricky Jones, my mentor. I remember him always just saying, there's no place in the United States that doesn't have blood in the soil, right? So we think, we're taught that there are these safe spots for Black folks. Like as long as you get north, you're safe. And we have like this romanticized image of the North as this safe haven for Black folks. So as long as it's not the South, right? We're better than them. We're the Union. That's the Confederacy. This is safe. But we realize there's racism everywhere, right? And some of your most racist spaces are in the North, right? And you talk about places like Chicago, Boston, New York City, terrible acts of racism. Philadelphia, places like that. We talk about, we talking about Black LGBTQ violence and stuff like that, right? But in terms of the guide, just the fact that, one, you had folks who were helping people navigate. I think it's a part of just Black ingenuity and Black excellence that we could have the forethought to do something like that, but also just the travesty of being Black in America, that you have to have something like that to exist in the first place, right? Like, we got to have a guidebook to say, okay, if I'm in this town, I can go to this gas station, I can sleep at this hotel, and I can eat at this restaurant. But I can't go to that one down that street because they're going to kill me, right? So it's just, the beautiful struggle, as Talib Kweli would say, or just the I'm trying not to cuss because I already said we're going to try to keep it a minute with the cussing, but it's just the terrible situation that Black folks consistently find ourselves, whether historically or present day.
Yeah, like I agree with all of that. And we'll just also add to it, like, ain't nowhere in the world safe for Black people. Like, it's not even just this country. Like, ain't nowhere really that we can go. Yeah, like the book. I think it's definitely so relevant today. In fact, a friend had asked me that, like, I don't know, a couple weeks ago, that she started watching. She was like, yeah, she's a white woman, and she was like, yeah, does that like still exist? And like, and I was like, that's a good question. I was like, if it don't, it should, because it would definitely, be beneficial. And Daryl, like, you kind of, touched on this when you were talking about, like, LGBTQ violence against, Black folks. And, like, Ashley is, thanking folks too. Like, I also want to thank the Black people for creating the book, because that provided a foundation for resources that we still use today, specifically LGBTQ folks, specifically trans folks. Like, as a Black trans man, going to the bathroom is hell in public, especially when you're traveling. But there's like tons of resources, either written or online, where like I can go to be like, look along this state route and see like where is it safe to get to the bathroom. FYI, generally Starbucks for good. But like, yeah, so like, I feel like those types of things probably wouldn't exist were it not for things like the Green Book.
No, for sure. I love that you brought in, that both of you all brought in like that, like the violence, physical, mental, emotional, economic, whatever that like we all face, but especially that the LGBT community faces. Just like as a personal narrative, I remember like I used to live in Indianapolis and families in Louisville. I'm using the restroom before I leave Indy. Like I refuse to do that because I can't stop, you know, and then but then I can stop in Louisville. Definitely not a Mecca, but like but when I get to Louisville I can stop now, right? And I remember the fear on one trip back from Indy, when I forgot to use the restroom before I left and I really need to use the restroom. We're sitting there like, okay, what's more liberal, the McDonald's or the Burger King? where are we going? And so
real quick, you know, just personal, just to make sure that people know that this is not just fake, we're making this up. This is like real life experience. I can remember this had to be about 2009, 2010, driving to Louisville. We had flew to DC and we're driving back from DC to Louisville, stopping in West Virginia, and stopped to a gas station, had to use the restroom, and you could still see that, you know, time had kind of wore it down, and it looked like somebody tried to sand it over, but you can clearly see it said colored atop of the men's bathroom, and it's like, oh shit, I gotta get up out of here because this is not safe. Like I do not want to be here that much longer. Like I didn't realize it until I got there. But I was like, we need to go. We gotta go. And that was not 30, 40 years ago. That was 10 years ago.
I won't drive through Indiana or West Virginia if I can help it. Like I just won't do it. Like when I moved to California, you know, you gotta go through Indiana to get to San Diego. And I was like, nope, you shall be taking the scenic route through Tennessee. And it added like a significant amount of time. But I was like, nope. When I lived in North Carolina, no, I know it's quicker to go through West Virginia, but I'm gonna handle those mountains in Asheville. I'm not driving through West Virginia, like not doing it. And this again, like you said, not long ago, I moved to San Diego in 2004, and I left North Carolina in 2014.
I wanted to add too to this conversation, like one, that I have similar experiences. I am originally from Texas, and so Texas is like one of the biggest states in the country, but you can drive for 24 hours and still be in the state of Texas. That's how big it is, right? And there are towns called Cut and Shoot, Texas. There are towns called Dieball, Texas. There are all types of towns where just the name of it is like, nah, don't stop there, right? And even like, I want to also connect this to violences that we've seen, right? So I want to bring in Sandra Bland here, and I want to bring in the fact that the highway that Sandra Bland was pulled over on, Highway 6, and right outside of Harris County, is called Waller County. And ever since I was a child, driving from Dallas to Houston, my parents would always tell me, when you get to Waller County, you go 5 miles below the speed limit. You do not play around. You need to get up out of there. You need to make sure you don't stop in Waller County, and you need to make sure you get out of Waller County safely. And so with that, I think that the Green Book has such significance to not only like our safety as Black folks, as queer Black folks, but also I think it's connected to our safety around police violence, right? Like our safety around how do we protect ourselves, and which places do we know, okay, you got to watch your back when you go through here, if you are going to go this way, right? And I think that there's so much significance there, right? And I think the history of the Green Book in general is just so critical. And that's what drew me to Lovecraft Country, because I wasn't introduced to it till I was in grad school. And it was just because I studied leisure, and it was one way that Black folks were able to get to a beach and get to, you know, a amusement park, or get to all the ways in which we found our joy, and the ways in which we were able to have family vacations and create these moments was through that Green Book. And so I'm so grateful that we have like a television show to be able to really uplifted and show its significance and its prominence in our existence, and how we were able to survive amidst white supremacist violence in this country.
And just one more thing, and I just feel compelled to share it because it was while actually working at the University of Louisville. I actually had the job that Zion has. I used to work for HSC, program coordinator. And I remember 2016, again, just 4 years ago now, having to go to Murray State to do a presentation at a job fair and recruit, students to the med school at U of L. And had to get a rent-a-car and drive from Louisville to Murray. And if you know the state, you are in some really dangerous cities that have a ton of history of racial violence. And I can remember having anxiety attacks the weeks leading up to that trip because I'm like, I'm a black man driving a car, so rent a car, so it's not mine, so I don't have the registration and stuff like that. Like I had to put my driver's license on the window shield of the car, so in case I got pulled over. This is right after Michael Brown had been killed around that time, and it was just like. But I was trying to drive, my lights kept on trying to fall off the windshield. I'm trying to keep that and keep up, all these things because these things are real. These aren't just, stories we hear, but we keep on seeing them constantly, happening over and over again, whether it's Cassandra Bland or Philando Castile, all these traffic stops that ended us being murdered. So, when we talk about this idea of a need for a guidebook, I wish, because I was trying to figure out which town sounds the least racist to stop in to get gas. And I remember literally I had like a 3/4 of a tank of gas leaving Louisville. And I was like, do I have to stop? And I was like, I'm on E, I got to stop. And I just had to make a decision and just pray for the best. And it worked out.
And you know what, Daryl, because you brought up, you work for U of L, I work for U of L, I think most of us work for U of L, all of us work for U of L, and specifically the health sciences campus. Let's just go ahead and get into it. We know the issues that are going on with the University of Louisville right now, anti-racist plan, whatever. And I personally think I've been at U of L since 2018. And quite frankly, I could use a green book for health sciences campus. Again, just since 2018, it's 2020 right now. The amount of times that I have encountered white people, usually white women, that are like questioning my existence in a space is absurd. Like completely absurd. I had a woman call me a vagrant in the stairwell of the building that I work at, which is the Able building, like first couple weeks. So I think when we're talking about all of this too, specifically talking about academic institutions, which again, they all have their issues and quite frankly, none of them were built for us except for HBCUs. We could very well use green books on campuses, whether you work there or a student.
No, yeah, I echo some of that in my job search after my intern year after grad school, I was having the opportunity to interview at places all over the country that sounded terrifying. Right. And then even as I was like, where it wasn't terrifying, and I'm like, maybe it is terrifying in the city of Louisville. But I was like, where I had some success, it was in Louisville. So that's why I came back to Louisville. But even how it limits the way that, not just the way we travel across the country, but the way that we decide to lay roots across the country. I just think that's really interesting. And I've had conversations with students who are doing that job search and wanting to feel comfortable in the company that they're going to go work for. And I'm just like, hey, here's my clues to figure out if the company's going to like you or not. Right. And I got a whole list of them. So I really appreciate that when you're talking about a green book just for going to work every day. You know what I mean? Yeah, that's huge. That's huge. I'm going to go to the next question. I knew we wouldn't get through 10 questions. So I think I'm going to start limiting it to 5 instead of 10. So I'm going to skip around a little bit. I will say, if you're watching Lovecraft Country, there's definitely a little bit of acknowledgement for colorism in the exchange between Letty, her sister, and her brother. We're not going to dive into that too deeply, but I'll leave some links for you to kind of get into that a little bit. But let's talk about James Baldwin's speech. So they're traveling. They figure out like, hey, we got to go to Arden County, Massachusetts, in order to figure out about Tick's birthright. And as they're traveling, it's like one of my favorite parts of the show is like this bomb, like Tierra Whack soundtrack is going. And then all of a sudden it's like old school audio clip. And you're like, whoa, I guess I got to listen to this. And so like one of the ones that struck me the most was like James Baldwin's speech about how we navigate different realities. And as they're doing that, they're traveling and they are seeing we're seeing the way that Black folks have to travel around the country. And so a question that I have right now is, how do we feel about our different realities now? I think that was really important to see that. I think that K through 12 education does at least a minimal good job of letting you know, like, hey, back in the day, they didn't like y'all, but they don't dive into it much deeper than that. So like, how are our realities different now? Like, I'm not going to ask the have things gotten better question, but like, just how are our realities different?
Yeah, like, yeah, I mean, for me, it's kind of hard to say. And like you mentioned, like, going K through 12, so I went to predominantly white schools here in Jefferson County, K through 12, basically. And the blackest school that I ever went to was when I was in undergrad. And I went to an HBCU, and that was like, I mean, talk about like shifting my reality, because, like going to predominantly white schools, like, I wasn't like the other Black students. So I was like treated exceptionally. But then when I got to HBCU, they were just like, yo, dude, like, you're not a special, unique snowflake, and you're writing this trash. It's cool, we're gonna get you together, but you're trash. So like, I think just like having that, but then like growing up in Louisville, like as a community activist and like working, like the different community organizations around Kentucky, I don't think my perspective has like really shifted. Like my reality hasn't really shifted. Because I was like one of those like weird 16-year-olds that was like interested in politics. And like paid attention to like pretty much like every negative thing. And then it became my job to pay attention to every negative thing. So I mean, for me, I think it's like kind of sad that like really things haven't changed that much. And that's, to me, that's kind of like the bummer, is that, like there's kind of like nothing new under the sun. And I wrote about this, a couple of times in our newsletter from my office. And like one of the things that I noticed, I was like, even like the scare tactics that these like white folks are using are the same. Like they're not even creative in how like they abuse us. Like, oh, okay, we're already gonna set some shit on fire. Okay, big surprise. Like they do the same stuff, setting churches on fire, setting organizations on fire, hanging nooses, hanging people. Like it's all the same. So like really, I'm like, what really has shifted? What do you have to shift in your reality? Because like you read about it in history and like it's still going on right now.
I'll say, and I guess I'll say slight spoiler. There's an episode later on that looks at race riots, and I remember looking at my partner after that episode and being like, I think that could happen tomorrow, maybe. Like I don't think nothing's that different. We've just got the internet now. So yeah, I don't want to disrupt more folks that maybe want to comment on like how our reality shifted at all, or is it pretty much the same?
I'll say that. So I've been also, for those of you who are just now watching, there's also a podcast, and I love podcasts. There is a Lovecraft Country podcast, and there's someone from the writer's room that is one of the co-hosts for the podcast. Highly, highly, highly recommended. I'm not all the way through all the episodes, but it's really good. And there's this constant question that they ask every episode of like, what is reality? So I love the idea that we're talking about the Baldwin speech that is in the first episode, and it is literally reconciling what is reality. And I think what the writers were trying to do in Lovecraft Country is to get viewers to understand that everybody's reality is different. But the reality of white folks and the reality of Black folks are two very, very different things, right? And oftentimes we see, and I think we'll see time and time again throughout the episodes, that it's usually white folks creating their reality, and it ends in violence for us, right? When we are trying to be who we are, existing in the ways that we are, that is when they come and disrupt how we're living and how we're existing in the world. So I love the integration of Baldwin in general, because like Baldwin Stan, but I think that like this particular excerpt from this speech is such integral to bringing us into this series, right? And it's a question that we have to constantly ask ourselves, like, what is Letty's reality right now? What is Tick's reality right now? Like, what's going through everyone's head in this moment?
Oh yeah.
I just want to co-sign that podcast is amazing, like beyond amazing.
So,
We will link to it. We'll also link to Baldwin's full speech. So all the speeches that you find in Lovecraft Country, we're gonna do our best to link to all of them, because like some of them are just so incredibly powerful, and should have been in your history books. They should have been the great speeches that you learned about back in history. Sorry to interrupt you, Darren.
No, you're good. But just kind of wanted to piggyback on what Dr. Brown was saying, and just kind of like, what is reality and what does it really mean, right? And how are we navigating the world and the space? And I think there are some really intricate similarities and differences everybody's experiencing. Between Letty as a fair-skinned Black woman versus her sister as a dark-skinned Black woman versus Tick as a Black man, and they're all navigating these things differently. And when we talk about your question, was it different or is it the same? I think the frequency is maybe less than maybe 1960s, but the possibility is still 100% right. I fully have to be aware that at any time somebody can shoot me because of the color of my skin. Is it happening at the same frequency? We're seeing lynchings at the same frequency as they did in the early 20th century, in the 10s, 20s, 30s, 40s. No, not necessarily. But I think we have to understand how violence has shifted. And we talk about violence. What does violence look like? Because violence is policy, right? Violence is laws, right? That's violence. So just because somebody isn't coming literally with a noose and hanging you in the middle of a street, maybe we're doing better in that regard. We see less and less of that happening. But it's violence when we allow, the racial wealth gap to be as wide as it is. It's violence when we allow, Black children to be in failing schools. Those are acts of violence and oppression and terrorism that we don't talk about, because Black people aren't getting shot in the street like they were in the 60s, so things must be better. I honestly think white supremacy would like things to be less physically violent, because it allows it to operate in more, anonymity, so people don't call it out. So I think there is this push that we don't want to be as physically violent, but we will if we have to reinforce our space in the world.
No, thank you so much for that, Daryl. I would agree, and I actually don't think I've heard like something that satisfied me on the difference, but it's really like you said, the frequency is different, but the actual impact is not different, right? And the possibility isn't different. So we got just a few more minutes left. Some other themes that we would have talked about would be sundown towns. Do they still exist? Even if they're not really enforced, I definitely think that everybody's got that commentary on do they still exist. And we didn't even get into the monsters, but an important question that I definitely want to touch on, given Vice President Harris getting into the White House in January, I believe January 20th, War of 1812, and the reason why the White House is white, and the scene in Lovecraft Country when they actually examined that, and like it's white because it was burned down, and they didn't want us to see what that was, so they painted it white. Like the commentary there that we've had former President Obama and now Vice President-elect Harris going to occupy that space. And I'm not talking about it from like the representation matters lens or anything like that. But honestly, as we think about their elections and like them sitting in those spaces and making those decisions, while that house is still painted white for the reasons in which it was painted white. Does anyone have any like statements or commentary on that? Because I'm not gonna lie, I missed it when I first watched that episode, and then when I caught it about an hour or so ago, I was like, oh my gosh, I don't even know how I could like sit and occupy that space, given the fact that that piece of our history is not told. So yeah, anybody have any commentary there?
Yeah, like honestly, I have yet to do any celebration that they were elected. I'm happy for them, but at the same time, I'm like, let us not forget that there are butthurt white people, butthurt white supremacists that are sore losers, and in addition to feeling like they're already losing things, being conditioned to feel like they're losing things specifically from people of color, they just lost this election. And I just already said that the scare tactics and the tactics of violence have not changed. Like they're still, freaking arsonists. Do I think that like anybody's going to set the White House on fire? No, not literally. But I would be lying if I said I was not concerned as we continue to get closer to inauguration day.
Sorry, my computer is like spazzed out. It's spazzed out. Was there anyone else just like thoughts on like Black folks occupying the White House, considering, I don't even know, like I guess maybe even like an unresolved issue with the structure itself?
I think that was such a significant piece of this episode that I think could be quickly like, oh, I didn't even know that this was happening, because a lot was happening in that moment. But the conversation that Tick is having with his uncle while Letty is in the back, and he's, like you said, asking like, well, why is the White House white again? And it's white in here. And oh, so there's just this history of shit being burned down, and we just pretend like it's not burned down. And for me, that's an analogy of like this country, and multiple parts of this country have burned. Tulsa burned. I just feel like it's just constant. Further episodes you'll see, but Tulsa burned, right? So when Black folks build something, and there is this recognition that Black folks built something, white folks come in and terrorize. White folks come in and use fire and they burn it down. And in order to pretend like nothing happened here, they paint it white. And I think that that's significant. And I think that we have to like look at how that shows up in our lives, right? Like, what are all these spaces that we're being asked to exist in? And like, even in higher education, I went to a predominantly white institution full of racist white people, founded by racist white people. And the fact that they are like, oh, we're not going to bring this monument down because this is one of our founding presidents, or all these different things. It's like, whoa. It's like all this is painted white and y'all are pretending like it's fine and it's okay for me to be here when it's really not safe for me to be here, right? So I think safety and whiteness is what is happening in that scene.
I saw this quote recently, and this is like, I was like, oh, I've got to save this because I work in diversity and inclusion. And so basically, it was saying, I'm paraphrasing, but basically, like, when people institute like these various policies or, programs or activities to increase diversity and inclusion, it doesn't break the system; it breaks the person. And we know what Obama looked like after 2 terms. Like, Black on crack, but he was on as hell. So yeah, it doesn't break the system, it breaks the
Awesome. Thank you all so much. We only touched on like half of the questions. I still think we had a really, really good conversation. Please, you see the rest of the videos posted. As you watch this series, feel free to watch these as an accompaniment. I'm going to be linking to the Langston League syllabi, which really calls out some different resources for further learning. I'm going to also link to the podcast that Asha and Zion mentioned, and all the speeches that we see throughout the series. These are not all of our folks, and so you'll see all of their bios listed of the people that will join us for these different conversations. But just so thank you for holding space with us. Again, if this is the day after it was posted, or if this is March 2028, like, just glad that you held space with us to kind of dive into this. So thank you to our guests, and we can go ahead and end the recording.